Hey guys, this is Eric Weingartner with Weingartner Racing. Today's video is a update about dyno session number 2 on the dyno mule, where I tested all these intakes except those two. They're DNFs. We'll get to that in a minute. All these intakes I'm going to talk about, just give some highlights today. I'm going to end up doing individual videos where I break them down by 3s or by 2s, because otherwise this video ends up insanely long. It's better to break them down that way anyway, so you guys get a better idea of what's going on. For those that have bought my book about the first dyno session, I am going to make another book for this. I'm actually making 2, and I'll talk about that in a minute as well. So you'll get to see all the numbers, much easier to view, better thing to see in those. So anyway, let's get started. For those that are unfamiliar with what this is and why there's so many intakes here and what I did, I had a dyno mule built, and it's a 406 small block Chevy, 11.2 compression ratio, AFR Enforcer 195cc heads, completely stock. It has an Urson cam that they donated, a solid roller. I think it's 260, 270, and about a 690 lift. 108 lobe separation, 1000 CFM carburetor, and tested a bunch of different intake manifolds in round 1, which was about 12 manifolds. And then round 1 made 44 dyno pools. This one ends up being a total of 70. So that means this dyno mule now has 114 dyno pools on it. Quite a bit. Anyway, so let's start with how it started. All right. So on Thursdays when I did the dyno session, but I called Gary Dunsworth, which is the guy who built the engine, who's also where I dyno, and said, hey man, can you do a couple things before we get the dyno in? Because I want to make sure everything is good to go in the engine before I get to all these. I said, can you change the oil, and can you just check the lash? And the reason for changing the oil is because when we changed 12 manifolds before, it wouldn't be unfathomable to me that some little piece of silicone might have fallen off and gotten into the oil, or maybe from us ripping off the intakes, maybe some water. Plus it was still on the break-in oil, so it seemed like a logical choice to change the oil. I didn't think it would affect the dyno numbers, but it did. It might have had some part into it. It's really hard to say for sure if that was it. He checked the lash. They were exactly where they were before. They hadn't changed, they hadn't grown, they hadn't shrank. It was exactly what it should be. So anyway, when we pulled off after dyno session number 1, this intake was on it. This is it. This is the Hurricane version 2. And this is the one with the bad port match. So let me show you. This is what it looked like. So it's pretty bad. But anyway, this one ended up being the best. You remember from dyno session 1? That one was the best. So we left it on just to keep the engine sealed up. But he does the oil change and checks the lash, starts up, warms up, gets up to temperature, makes a pull. When we left off last time, 568 horsepower. So he makes a pull, 528 horsepower. That's down 40. So he's freaking out, obviously, because you lose 40 horsepower, something's wrong with the engine, right? So he looks on it and realized he'd put the open spacer in, that one, instead of the tapered, which is what we ran before. So he switched to put the tapered on, and the power came up to 548 horsepower. So it's still down about 20 from what it was 6 weeks ago. So for the next 24 dyno pools, he tries just about everything underneath the sun to try to get back to 568 horsepower. And you might say, what did he try? Well, he thought maybe I added too much oil, so he took a half quart out. Maybe that the gasoline, which obviously we burned through, maybe it's a little bit different mixture, added some more race gas, didn't make a difference. Maybe the timing got moved, didn't happen. Maybe crank trigger changed, that didn't work. Changed the entire ignition system, didn't change a thing. So he's doing all this stuff and it's repeating, it's just not what it was before. So he called me up and says, hey man, I don't know what it is, I've got stumped. And he's at this point, he's also checked just about everything on the dyno too and looked at a whole bunch of different tests, and he's stumped. I said, you know what, I'm going to show up and I'll bring one that we ran before on the motor, which was this one. This is an AFR 4812. It's a dual plane. I have done nothing to it since the last time we ran it. Nothing. All I was going to do was change the different spacer. So that'd be an easy one just to put on there because that's a good data point from the first time we tested. So we have that information. So it should be close to what that was. So should that have also been. By the way, he also tried a 2-barrel carburetor because we also tested that intake on a 2-barrel carburetor and the 4-barrel. On the 2-barrel, it was still down 10. So anyway, like we're gonna have to, even on Thursday, he did 3 more pulls just to see if he couldn't figure out anything else. I said, let's just change it. I mean, we're gonna find out here when we change this dual plane and let's see what happens. So we changed the intake manifold because I did notice when he made a pull with this that it was a little bit leaner than what it had been before. By a couple, not a whole lot, but a little bit leaner. So my thought was because of the bad port match, maybe it was leaking just a little bit of air, but he was like, would it would make it idle weird and it would be unresponsive. This thing runs perfectly, flawlessly. There's 0 things wrong with it. He even cut open the oil filter. Nothing. It's just not the same. So thought maybe there's just a little bit of air, just enough to change it, just a little bit on the air fuel ratio. So we changed intake gaskets too, since we're going to be switching all these manifolds. Might as well switch gaskets, put new ones on. Put that on there. And this one, it's about anywhere between 4 and 8 horsepower down from what it was, but pretty close. So on the very first pull when it's cold, it's actually almost dead nuts on with what it was last time, except for last time it was up to temperature. So once we got it up to temperature, it's close, but not the same. It's about 8, like I said, between 4 and you could say between 4 and 10 horsepower down this time, which brings up this point. And you might say, how is that possible? Well, the best we can figure out is the air screwed us because we're dyning in Oklahoma, and if you don't like the weather in Oklahoma, just wait a day and it'll change, and it does. And what I mean by that was, last time we dynoed 6 weeks ago, I think the DA was like 2,500, and this time the DA was 4,400. And I know right now people are clicking in, the SuperFlow has a data acquisition, and it has a weather correction, and it corrects for that, so it's correcting for the incorrect weather. You're absolutely correct. And that's what I would have thought too, had not done anything with this. What I could tell you is there's a mathematical formula that they try to assume that an engine will make the same power that by this math, whether it be a bad weather day versus a good weather day. However, engine don't care. Each individual engine's different. Some likes more temperature, likes more air pressure, whatnot. It's not 100%. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is, if we're really trying to get a good A/B test, everything that was done here should have been tested on the exact same day with the same weather conditions or close thereabouts. We also had one other thing screwing us. As we're there, the weather conditions are changing. The air pressure is dropping. So when I got there, it was about 28 on the barometer. When I left, it was 27.3. That's almost 0.7 of a pound of pressure loss. The dyno is correcting for it, but it's hard to verify that thing. So the engines, you just cannot compare it that way. So long story short, the reason why I bring that up is to say, when I'm trying to compare some of the stuff we did to the earlier dyno session, I'm not so certain it's valid to compare this session from last session, only because the weather change, and even with the correction, I don't think it can match close enough, especially since some of the differences are within 10. So it's really, really hard to say. Of all the things that got tested, the only thing I can say for certain that, yes, this was for sure a gain, was what I did to the Edelbrock Super Victor, which I'll tell you in a minute. The others, I can't. Well, besides the open spacer on that dual plane. Just because they're so close, and even if it lost, you couldn't say, well, did it lose because the weather was worse, or was this change actually worse? So anyway, this brings up the books. I'm going to make one complete book over just this dyno session, and then I'm going to do a separate one that does comparisons between dyno session 1 and 2. The reason why 2 different books is because I don't want someone thinking that I can compare those and these are absolutes, because they're not. That's what the third book's for. And you could look at it and be like, oh, that makes better sense, that you now can take it with a grain of salt. Dyno session 2 would just have the information from these. So anyway, there's that. I'm going to tell the results on all of these because they're actually in order from highest to lowest here. And I'm going to go through each one of these, just the highlights, because you should know. So let's get to it. You've been waiting 10 minutes. Here we go. Remember what I said about the dyno numbers before. This was number 1. This is an Edelbrock Super Victor 2925. This one was the burr finish. This is one of those things where I can say I'm fairly certain this helped, because even with the baseline being lower than what it was before, that was up a significant amount. So even if it should have been the same or worse, just from the baseline, it was better. So I would say the burr finish works, at least in this case. It would have been nice to be able to smooth this up with the 60 grit, put it back on, and see if it does anything. I don't know. What did it make? It made 560 on horsepower and 532 torque. Remember this one last time was your winner, 568. It's not there anymore. That's in the position it was in. So winner 560 and Edelbrock Super Victor and 533 torque. This is second place. This is an AFR 4811 version 3, and it's fully ported. It made 560 horsepower and 529 torque. This was third place. This is the Hurricane version 1. All I did was port the inside runners. That's it. 558 horsepower, 533 torque. This is your fourth place. This is a Motown / BMP, same intake manifold. 556 horsepower, 532 torque. By the way, this is stock. Here's what's interesting. You see these 4? They're within 4 horsepower. That's why it's so hard to compare this. These are so tight that, small weather changes. And remember, I'm not even giving you the best runs. I'm giving the ones where the water temperature and oil temperature were as close together as possible. So, which is tough. We end up making sometimes 5 pulls on a manifold just to get the temperatures the same as at the others so that it would compare. Anyway, those are so close, you can't really, if you compared them on the other day, who knows? So there you go. Those are really close. Now there's a blank spot here because this manifold is still actually on the engine. Hurricane version 3, where I filled the floor, I think it helped it, but it also traded. So what I mean by that is you'll have to see a different video. But anyway, it made 555 horsepower, 532 torque. So still close to those. I mean, that's only it's 1 horsepower down from that. So, and this was our baseline. They made 550, 531 torque. The Edelbrock Super Victor, fully pulled, 2892, big mamma jamma. Wrong size for this deal. This is trying to shove 10 pounds of air in a 5-pound bag with those heads that are on it. 548 horsepower, 519 torque. This was the one everybody wanted to see. The Holley Strip Dominator 300-25, 547, 520 torque. This was the AFR 4811. This was a difference from last time. What I did on this one before in the last dyno session had a cloverleaf. I cut it out. It now makes 546 and 527. This one is the Edelbrock Performer RPM. It's not air gap. What I had done in the previous session was stock. What I did this time is just cut out that gap. It made 543 and 524 torque with an open spacer. I do have to say something about this one though. This, when I'm telling you all the numbers, remember they're all the same water temperature. This one is, in one of the earlier pulls when it was still cold or cool, this made the most torque of any of the dyno sessions and any of the manifolds, period. On its best run, it made 544 torque. None of these and none of the other ones from the last time ever did that. Even when it had its line across that, it never did that. For that run, that was the best, period, as far as torque goes. Anyway, there's that. This is the AFR 4812. This time we tried it 2 ways, the way we did it before with the 4-hole taper. However, the open spacer was better, and that gave it 540 horsepower and 532 torque. It actually ends up making more torque now than that the RPM does. Kinda. There's a bunch of in the run where this one's better. And it's still, even when it was colder, it didn't do that. This one is a different one altogether. This is an Edelbrock 2701. Let me squat down because I got to show you this. This is not stock. This was luckily for a customer. He said, yeah, you can try it on the dyno mule. This is actually, it's just port matched, but it's port matched to an AFR 195. So it's not completely stock because of that. But anyway, good power still, 531 horsepower, 523 torque. That's really good. This was actually the Victor Jr., which a lot of you wanted to see too. Bad news bears for you. Got it all bolted up on the dyno and got it all cinched down. We go to add water and it starts pouring water out the top through here and here, which scared the crap out of me. And scared Gary too, obviously, because then you have a fear that you're filling the crankcase up with water. And we already have other issues with the oil pan, which I'll just tell you real quickly. When we were dynoing this one, luckily it's happened on the very first pull. We were making runs with this. And Gary, remember he told you he took out half a quart of oil. We looked down this drain pan and it's got oil in it. It's quite a bit of oil in it. It seems like it's getting more. I look underneath the oil pan and it's got like a tack weld. It looks like where maybe it had a crank scraper or trap door, and there's a hole there, and it's dripping this fast. Drip, 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 drip. So I don't know how much oil lost. He ends up adding, like, I think a half a quart just to make sure. But see, with another variable that kind of changed it. Luckily, it was on the first one, and all the rest had the same oil. You might say, how did you fix it? Here's how we did. Because when there's oil in the pan and stuff, ain't nothing sticking. We got some of that quick steel that I used for that turtle, shoved it up there, put a piece of rubber over that just to hold it there because they ain't sticking on oil. Put a piece of wood over the rubber and used like a small jack just to hold it in place. Seemed like it worked. It didn't really leak that much after that. So yeah, that's gonna be fixed before we do it again. But that sucked. That was another time killer. This dyno session was not near as smooth as the one before. I mean, we still changed. I think the quickest we changed one was 17 minutes. That's from stop the engine, change the entire manifold, firing it up, 17 minutes. That's still pretty quick, but there's some that just took longer, like this one. So you might say, why did it leak water? Well, I can't tell if this one, Cecil brought this one. If you watch my videos, you know who he is. But he brought this one, and you could tell it's got some porosity, but real bad back here. This probably would be okay if you put a big old bead of silicone on it and let it set up. We ain't got time for that on the dyno. The last one is, this is another Holley strip dominator. This was also sent in by a customer, but if you remember, watch my other videos, it's got the flange that's cut too much. I don't know if I can capture that right, see it? And it didn't seal. I just set it on there before with any silicone, it didn't seal. So now I also got a DNF. We couldn't compare two different manifolds, or same manifold, but just two different ones. So that's kind of a bummer. Anyway, that's the rundown. I will tell you, several of them got tested with a 2-barrel. That one, the 2701. Let's see. The Holley strip dominator got tested with a 2-barrel. The filled up epoxy floor got tested, and the Motown, and the Super Victor. So several of them got tested with a 2-barrel. And you're like, why would you test that? Circle track guys have to run that 2-barrel. So anyway, it's a little bit longer of a video just to tell you all this stuff to give a rundown. I'm gonna do more in-depth ones later. This was very exhausting, I'm not even gonna lie. But there you go. You might say, what are you gonna do now? I'm telling you right now, this thing became so frustrating because they're all so close. And they're all in pretty much the same situation. They're moving as much air as the heads will allow. And after that, it's just runner links that's making a difference, maybe line of sight that's making a difference. It's all those things, but the intake isn't really holding back the engine. It's the head. So what's going to happen next? I was going to do a third session, do some more testing with it, but I'm not. I'm changing the heads. I'm going to go to a ProMax Project X 215 that's stock. It flows, I think, in the 290s. I've flowed some before, and 215 cc's versus 195 cc's. It's larger runner there. The cross section goes from like a 2-inch. I think these are like 2.3. It should make probably 30 or 40 more horsepower period, but I should see bigger differences on these manifolds. And then I'm gonna start doing small processes of porting on the AFR and forces that are on there, and we'll get to see what those individual results do on porting that. And I'm gonna step up to make the heads go really, really well on either Pro Max or the AFR and forces eventually. But I'll be doing it in steps on the AFR and forces. The Pro Max, probably just gonna go hog it wild on it and get it moving as much air as possible. So this way I can see some much bigger differences between these. Instead of seeing 4 horsepower, I imagine once the heads are really moving some air, we're gonna see some bigger differences. And we'll try this stuff again. I don't know that I'll be doing necessarily things like this and then waiting another session and trying again, just because of the problems that occurred now. So if I do it, I'm gonna try to do it within the same week. So maybe I could talk Gary into doing something on Monday. Yeah, maybe I won't do as long as this dyno session Monday, drive back here, work on it, and maybe by Friday I can get back on the dyno and try again. Of course, it ends up costing me more to do that as well, but I think maybe it'll be better than trying to compare, you know, such a far distance apart, or try testing at least when the air is the closest it could be. So anyway, hopefully that gives you some information. Guys, remember, I am no Superman and I make plenty of mistakes. If you've got questions you want answered, please ask and I'll do my best to answer those. You guys, take care.